Well, welcome everyone to our webinar. It's the first time I've ever done this. I kind of wish I did have everyone's face up so I could see who's participating. Yeah, just a little housekeeping, I guess. Joe will be recording. So if you know anyone who wants to watch this, who couldn't watch it tonight, we'll have a link up some point on the San Miguel Church website.
If I can interject one quick thing, you can't see, you can see us, but we can't see you. If you have questions, then you submit them either through the chat or more preferably through the Q&A. And so there should be a button at the bottom of your screen for that. And then Adrianna will specify when she answers the Q&A. If you have comments or anything, I'll be monitoring the chat and the questions and can respond that way while Adrianna's talking. So I'll turn it over to Adrianna now.
Okay, yes, and if you could please put your questions in the Q&A, and I will answer questions if I can at the end. Yeah, I'm not going to be looking at the chat while I'm talking. So again, I'll just check the Q&A at the end if you can just type them in anytime, and yeah, be patient until then. So I want to start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. So dear Lord, Heavenly Father, thank you that we could be here today via Zoom. And we ask you to open our hearts and minds to understand the great mysteries of your universe, celestial and terrestrial. And we ask through the intercession of our great Holy Father of our Archdiocese, Saint Francis, and Venerable Maria de Agreda, and Saint Faustina, our holy angels, and our Blessed Mother, Mary, the mystical city of God. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, let's see, hopefully that calmed me down a little prayer. Well, I just think it's cool. Here we are in this time of Zoom, but God doesn't need Zoom. God doesn't need the internet. He doesn't need TV. He can do his miracles anyway. And it's kind of neat also. Today is the feast of Saint Faustina, another a saint, a nun who bilocated. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So Maria of Agreda, who evangelized the Southwest by bilocating, and by her marvelous book that she wrote, The Mystical City of God. Those are two ways that she really had an impression on our part of the world. And I wanted to share the story because I think it's such an exciting story. It's really almost, in a lot of ways, unbelievable story, but I think it should be more well known, and especially how she touched our town and our church, something we can be proud of locally. So because of that, I painted this painting in honor of her visit to Socorro, but I'll get to that at the end. For now, we're going to do a little bit of history that leading up to this amazing moment in time. Okay, so just to start, we'll start with Sor Maria's childhood. She was born Maria Coronel on April 2nd, 1602 in Agreda, Spain. Her parents, Francisco Coronel and Catalina Arano, were fervent lay Franciscans. Her father, she used to wake up every morning and hear her father dragging a 100-pound cross on the floor. He did that every morning. And her mother wore, heavy dark cloak sometimes, and would do that Franciscan meditation on a skull, every day. So she would see this. So you can sort of imagine then with such fervent parents that they would have a pretty special child. They did have 11 children were conceived, but only 4 survived. One fact from her past that I think is significant is that her father, who was very involved in organizing religious festivals and events in town, he organized a religious play called The New World as Discovered by Christopher Columbus. So this made a big impression on her. She was just 7. So he's where she first got interested in other other parts of the world. So just to show you, this is Agreda, the town, drone view here. And in Spain, this is Soria. This is the district. It was sort of the county, I guess. And then Agreda was up in the corner there. So she, as a child, she was very prayerful. She was sort of timid and shy. At a very young age, she experienced God's presence, and she felt not sinfulness so much as she felt at a young age that she could go either way, you know, how terrible sin was. And so at a very young age, she committed to being as close to God as possible. Okay, covering some of this, but this is her childhood home. And when she was like 17, actually when she was 15, her mother had a dream that they were supposed to turn their family home into a convent. Now, as you can imagine, her father was not really on board with this. He took 2 years of convincing. And so in 1619, the whole family entered Franciscan orders. The mother, Maria, and the daughter, Catalina, the Maria and her sister, had the convent here. They called it after Concepcion. They were very devoted to La Purísima Concepcion, the Immaculate Conception. So that their home, they turned into a convent, and the father and the 2 brothers went and joined a Franciscan order. Just want to move my face here to show you this painting. This shows you the family tree in a painting from 1892. They're offering their home to Mary, the Immaculate Conception. And here are the 2 sisters, the mother, the father, and then the 2 brothers, Franciscans as well. So the whole family in religious life. And so when she was 18, she professed to Sor Maria. And then when she was 25, her mother passed away, and she was, much to her trepidation, elected as the abbess. She was only 25. And let's see, by 1633, they had to construct a new, larger convent, also now on the outskirts of Agreda, because of her miraculous gifts, which were becoming known. It attracted many women joining their order. So they had to build this much larger convent, which was completed in 1633. And the reason I wanted to go into depth a little bit about the convent building and her being abbess is that she wasn't just like this flighty, strange, shrinking violet. She was in charge of her convent. She directed it. She helped design and construct, not physically, but directed the building of the convent. So she was a very strong, organized woman. Okay. As part of that, let's see, just again, a little more background before getting into her mystical gifts. I love this painting, or this is in Mexico, supposedly depiction of her when she was 20 years old. She is usually depicted with a quill because of her writing. And sometimes you'll see her with a cross, holding a cross because of how she evangelized the Native Americans of bringing crosses with her. This is a front page of her book. I can show you this volume. If you've ever seen The Mystical City of God, this is just one of 4. The whole work was like 1,200 pages. At one time she had it is the life of Mary, especially, and then Jesus. Mel Gibson referred to her book when he was making his movie. At one point, after she had almost finished it, her confessor went away, and she had a temporary confessor who was convinced that women should not write. I know my daughter's going to love this, but women should not write, and it had to be from the devil. And he told her to burn it, and she was obedient. And she also was nervous about it also. So she burned it, the first copy. So I can relate a little bit because yesterday with my technical problems I had done like 5 or 6 slides and it just crashed. They just disappeared and I had to redo the whole thing today. So I can relate to her, but she had 10 years to rewrite it. I just had 1 day. So she had a 22-year correspondence with King Felipe. It started in, let's see, I have it covered here, 1641, I believe. It lasted until both of their deaths. They died within a few months of each other. He was a real ne'er-do-well. He was a philanderer, terrible, and he would always write to her about his sins and ask God to forgive his sins and all this, but he never really reformed his life, but especially he asked for prayers for the kingdom to help in their various wars. Unfortunately, this is after the defeat of the Spanish Armada, and Spain was kind of descending in power, and Felipe was dealing with that, King Felipe, I should say. But interestingly, he was the only one that had an extant copy of the Mystical City of God. After she burned her copy, he always, when he knew she was writing it, he kept pressuring her to write chapters more and more. So he had a copy, which kind of was a problem for her. Later on, she had to come before the Inquisition because of her writing and the stories of her traveling, and they thought maybe the devil was involved in this. And also at one point she endorsed a general who later was treasonous against the king. So they said maybe she was part of a plot, So they asked her, do you have another copy, or have you written another copy? And she said no. She knew about the king's copy, but she wasn't sure if like a monk or someone else had copied it out. Like it wasn't directly by her hand. So this was a little subterfuge to save that copy, which it bothered her actually for some years later, until the confessor said, no, it's worth saving. You did the right thing. It wasn't really a lie, But anyway, she decided to start it all over from scratch, and it became more like in-depth from her later years of maturity. I would be interested, I don't know about this, done a study between the first copy that was the king's, if it even exists, and the later copy. Anyway, so that's, and also just as an authoress, she has studied in Spain, in Spanish, in literature programs. She's considered one of the prime writers of the Spanish Baroque style. And she's studied, even in the US too, in Spanish language. It's difficult to read. It's beautiful, but it's a Baroque style. Like if you think of Baroque architecture with lots of ornamentation. So like we like brevity and conciseness in the modern times, but in those days, the more flowery or ornate, the bigger words you used, they like that. They like that in that time. It was a stylistic time. So it's not an easy read, but it is a beautiful read. Okay, so now now that I gave a little bit about that outside practical life, I'm going to go to the interior of her mystical life. She started, once she professed as a nun in 1620 to about 1623, she was 18 to 21, she experienced what they called exterioridades, which were like exterior manifestations of faith. When she would pray just so deeply. She would levitate. In fact, the nuns would watch her and no one knew. She didn't know that the nuns were watching her pray and levitate, and they would invite, people would come into the convent from outside, like the stories that she was levitating and going to trances. And like once they would try, she was so light, they would actually they blew on her or I don't know how they got, and she would kind of move aside a little bit. She was so weightless. But when she learned, she was mortified. She couldn't believe that people in the public were watching her, levitate and pray, because she had no idea, so deep was her trance. And I think she had about 1,000 plus episodes of these levitations and trances. The significance of that is that these coincide with her, most of her times in the New World. She did say later that her visits were from 1620 to 1631, but the majority of her visits were in this period, and they were before, most of the Spanish exploration and the Spanish exploration encounters with the Native Americans. It was causing too much disruption also in the convent. So her confessor said to pray that these exterioridades would go away. And so most of them stopped by 1623, because she asked our Lord to take them away. So as I said, during these trances, I think it's sort of the time when she was bilocating and mostly in New Mexico and Texas and a little bit in Arizona. The way she described this, well, so in terms of her bilocating, but also with her experiences with our Blessed Mother and her angels. There are three ways, and they coincide with mystical literature, mystical descriptions of, these sort of states. They were sometimes imaginative, like in her imagination. Sometimes they were intellectual, where she would just know things but not see anything. And then actual corporal visions or physical, where people would actually be there physical. But these are the most rare. And in the hierarchy of spiritual life, interestingly, the physical ones are considered the lowest level, and the intellectual are associated with the most divine, most like God-like, where it's just the intellect and you kind of know without seeing or experiencing anything. She had experiences, she said, she had 6 angels like attending her. Especially her dialogue with the Blessed Virgin, especially started when she became abbess at 25, because she said, I can't do this. I'm only 25. I'm not mature enough to handle this responsibility. And the Blessed Virgin Mary started to speak with her and said, don't worry, I will be here and I will help, I'll be here and I'll help you. And it was around this time that she started having these experiences and thoughts that Mary and our Lord wanted her to write a book about her life. And if you do read the City of God, there's a chapter, there's a chapter explaining the life of things that are going on. And then at the end of the chapter is an instruction from Mary. So even in the book, there's how the Blessed Mother instructed her. Just one thing I want to share that I thought was interesting, because we're studying the Blessed Virgin Mary and we were talking about the incarnation. But what she describes, for example, is that when Joseph had his dream, when Joseph was going to divorce her, it wasn't because she was pregnant and he was scandalized or, but that he knew that she was pregnant, like with the Messiah, and he didn't feel worthy. So that's why he wanted to divorce her. So according to her, and he also pledged to be a virgin for his life. So the reason was that he left her was not because she was pregnant, he didn't feel worthy. Again, that's one of the mysteries, if you believe it or whatever, that she reveals in her writing. She's had several miraculous healings. She was near death a few times. One was with the statue of Madonna of Martyrs. It's in Zaragoza now. And I think the church had burned down and she was instrumental with King Felipe's help to build a beautiful shrine to her. I also, in her book too, in the later chapters where she deals with the apostles, in her book is what also led to that shrine of Santiago being so big. It's because of her writings about St. James. Okay, so there are also perfume scents around her, and she's incorrupt to this day. They had 14 inspections from 1667 to 1989, and she's incorrupt, which is often a sign of sanctity. You can, if you visit the church, her body's laid out there in state. Anyway, a long story why she has not been canonized yet is that the whole idea of the Immaculate Conception was really controversial. There were those who were called the Immaculists, who believed that she was conceived without sin, and then the Maculists, macula meaning spot or stain from the Latin. So that went on for a long time. Really interesting in my studies. I thought, if you can imagine, okay, like in our day, people have celebrations if a football team wins, right? Well, in like it was 1661 or something, when the Pope wrote a papal bull, just a little bit saying that, going towards accepting the Immaculate Conception. And then the streets of Agreda, there were big celebrations and fireworks and parties, everyone was so excited about the Immaculate Conception. And on the other hand, when sometimes something went against it, there would even be riots. So, in the 17th century Spain, that's what people got excited about. And then ironically, after the Immaculate Conception dogma was approved, though, in 1854, you would think that would clear the way because the debate's over. But then after Vatican II, they accused her of being too Marian. So now she was too Marian, and they thought that her work would get in the way of, ecumenism, and that she put Mary on too high a pedestal. So that kind of is another strike against her. Okay. This missionary longing for souls. So I'm just going to just run through some of this. she had a deep concern for souls of unchurched peoples. I just use the word unchurched, but she meant in her visions, she saw peoples from around the world, not only Native America, and she was just so wanted their conversions just with all of her heart and soul, that they should be in darkness and don't know God, and that she wanted them to be brought to baptism. She wrote, even as a teenager, she would give her life's blood, if only to people could be converted. So she thinks that was part of her intense longing. That is what facilitated her bilocations to teach them about God. Through her teenage years, she had an intense interest in geography and creation. There were lots of books, cartography books, and books writing about all the new animals and flora and fauna. Everything was being discovered. And she said she had even visions, like one of her books, one of the things she wrote in her teenage years, even, it's almost like a drone view, of the world, from the outside. She wanted to be a missionary herself, which she couldn't as a woman. In those days, she could not be a missionary. And she always wrote to the Franciscans, how lucky they were, how they didn't know how lucky they could go. And she wished she could go, and she would accompany them in prayer, but that she, obviously she couldn't be a missionary at that time. She had this great respect for all peoples, very much in her writing, because there were people who thought at that time that, Native Americans and other people were not, they didn't have souls. They were not fully human. They could not comprehend the mysteries of God. But she would say again and again that all were created by God equally. Jesus, well, I said right a little down there, Jesus shed his blood equally for everyone. They had souls and even guardian angels, which is interesting. During the Inquisition, they asked her about this. This is not a doctrine of the church that, these Native Americans have guardian angels. Where do you come up with that? And she said, well, if they have souls and were created by God as we are, then yes, and he will give them guardian angels and to help them, through life. He has compassion on all of his creatures and all of the people he's created. And interestingly, or kind of cool for us, is that he had that from her prayer, God told her that he had special compassion on the peoples of New Mexico, and that these people were the most likely to convert, and Texas. She kind of added Texas later, but yeah. But especially, I think that's really neat. Of all the people in the whole world, that God had special compassion on the Native Americans here. And then she wrote to the Franciscan monasteries, to this Fray Alonso Benavides. I'll talk about him later more. But after he met with her and he went back, and she wrote, and maybe she heard about abuses or things going on, and she said, take to the Franciscan missionaries, take soldiers of good repute and habits, men who forbear patiently, the rest of it, with abuses that they might suffer. So she was very firm on that, that the natives should be treated well. And buen ejemplo is the Spanish, and that they themselves should consider themselves fortunate to labor for souls. She said how even the dead, even the souls in heaven envy them this great labor that they have to convert souls, because that each soul meant so much to God, and the loss of even one soul grieves the Lord so much. And again, she didn't know how she went there. She said there was sometimes imaginative, intellectual, or physical, and she had about 500, I think she estimated 500 plus visits to the New World. Okay, a little bit more about those visits. Well, anyway, here's a map. But first I'll say, okay, when she described Mary, like, it's interesting also to read the City of God and see Mary goes up to heaven several times. And it's kind of interesting to read those descriptions, to think about her also in her journeys, her mystical journeys. You can just insert Sor Maria instead of the Blessed Virgin Mary in some of those passages. But she said that describing Mary, she had because this was while Mary was on earth, not after she was assumed. But there's a spiritualized condition can conquer the resistance of gravity and penetrate matter. So could take that to mean her own. How did she go there? After the Inquisition, the head of the Franciscans in Spain, Padre Monero, asked her to write about her experiences more in her life. And the way she described it to is whether or not I really went in my body is something about which I cannot be certain. And it is not surprising I have questions in my mind for St. Paul, who understood things better. He says, I know not how, right? When he says he was taken up into the seventh heaven. I have some quotations. I'm not sure if I have time from the Inquisition. So the Inquisition had this double-edged thing, right? Sword that she was nervous about it, but it left us a reflection of her describing things. Okay, I'm just going to read a few quotations because it's really beautiful. And anyway, this book, I really recommend this book. It's very readable. It's in my bibliography at the end. Maria de Agreda, Mystical Lady in Blue. It's not really an academic book. The only thing is she goes a few chapters too much about her correspondence with the king. It's like, okay, I don't care, but a lot of the other material is really good. Okay, so she said, I could distinguish massive areas, but only briefly. Mainly, though, I realized the multitudes of people in the world and how few knew the gospel. With this knowledge, my heart came undone. It was not the purpose to know the names of the places, but the perdition of the souls. So, because they asked her if you know all the places you went or what you were doing. Let's see. Okay, I cannot say whether I went there physically or not. But no, I did not preach from a pulpit because I am not that eminent. Nor did I call to them, meaning the Indians, or make them join me. So sometimes there were more Indians and sometimes there were less, but it does seem to me that the Lord arranged the means to suit the end he desired. Okay, because they asked, what did she tell them? And she said, I said that I brought them news from far away and that I had come to advise them in the faith. Okay, I understand. And then he said, what did you preach to them and what convinced them to convert? The inquisitor asked. I understand that there might be some doubt about this because there is no way for anyone else to verify it. Nevertheless, our discussions included the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, which would give them the light to understand God and not be so attached to earthly things. Then there are other things she talked about. I don't want to go into all of them. Some sort of like the Immaculate Conception, the story of humanity's redemption through her Son, the Trinity. And she said, and she told them that the doorway out of darkness was through the church and baptism in the Spirit. And so they were eager for baptism. This part is interesting too, I think. She said, I never much noticed the passage of time. If it seemed as though I was there for a longer time, it also seemed as though they gave me some shelter and sustenance, and whatever hours there were seemed to be enough. And the way they communicated, she said, the way of speaking was certainly very different from what we have here. Sometimes we used external gestures. Other times, perhaps God used an angel to speak through me. It felt good to my soul, despite the enigma of how it was happening, so that I never felt anything contrary to the faith or the truth. Okay, and then let's see. Oh, in the letter to the missionaries, this is where she wrote the places that she went. Okay, so just bear with me again for a little bit here. Okay, this is a letter this is part of that letter that where she was telling to take good soldiers and to be patient. As part of that, she described where she went. This is in 1631. And so I say that this is what befell me in the provinces of New Mexico, Quivira, the Humanas, and other nations, although these were not the first kingdoms where I was taken by the will of God. By the hand and aid of his angels, I was carried wherever they took me, and I saw and did all that I have told the Father, and other things which, being numerous, it is not possible to narrate in order to enlighten all those nations in our holy Catholic faith. The first ones where I went are toward the east, I believe, and one must travel in that direction to reach them from the kingdom of Quivira. I call these kingdoms with reference to our way of speaking, Titlats, Chilescas, and Caburcos, which have not been discovered. Anyway, that's how she described some of the places she went to. And we think now that Quivira, when she talks about it, was out here, by the Salinas monuments. If you go out that road, I forgot the highway, but down Bernardo, if you've been to the Salinas National Park, there's the Abo ruins in Quade, and I think there's Gran Quivera, though it's not on this map, but that the Humanos were out here during their trades. They came from Texas and southern Texas. They would come to trade in the summers, and I think she told them to stay in one of those areas, and that the missionaries would come. This was before, missionaries were even there, but she would tell them, and then also to go up to Isleta, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So anyway, so this is the map sort of. You see Socorro, San Antonio. There was the Seneca Pueblo here, and Palabo would have been where Socorro is. And there was one in Sevieta too that Professor Bletzer was unearthing. There was a mission and a church up in here too. Okay. All right. This I like this woodcut of her. Wait, she's from the 1730s. It's in the archives of in Austin, Texas, of the Catholic Church. She is holding the cross, teaching the Native Americans. And this map, I liked it. It's an old map. Unfortunately, you really have to zoom in to see, but their understanding, see, there's only one river here, the Rio Grande. I think the Rio Bravo, they put in as one river as they understood it. But they had some of the tribes right and where they were. This map was based on an actual Franciscan friar, Claude Bernon, who went back to Europe. And I have the actual artist up there, who's another Franciscan friar. He made this map based on Claude Bernon's descriptions of the New World. So you can find it online if you want to look at this in more detail. It was on Wikipedia. If you look up like colonial New Mexico or colonial maps of New Mexico, and it'll come up. Okay. Okay. Now I have to get to our real story. It's already 7:40. First, I want to just tell a little about. Unfortunately, like I said, I didn't have time to go into more detail on the slides of the story, so I'll just have to tell the story a little. You can look this up. Some of the facts I'm going to share now, and it's in my bibliography at the end, is an excellent article. Maybe some of you saw it, by Paul Harden, our own local historian, Paul Harden, who is, I don't think he's Catholic. He's not Catholic, and I'm not even sure if he's a believer, but he wrote an excellent article describing her visits to Isleta, and also where I got the date for my painting is from his article and is his estimation. So the natives came between the Humanos between 1623 and 1629. Every summer on their trading route, they would come to Isleta and ask the fathers to come teach them more about God and to baptize them. And they said this lady from the heavens was instructing them. The lady would come down and teach them, and she told them to go to the fathers and ask them to come. And every year they would put them off because they didn't have enough friars at the time. Well, before they even came, in 1622, one of the church Franciscans, who they knew from Maria de Agreda in Spain, was telling, these stories were circulating about her experiences. So one of the leaders in Mexico, I think it was Father Marchilla, he sent a letter to the Archbishop Zuniga, Manso and Zuniga in Mexico City, saying, have you heard any stories? We have this nun here who says she's teaching the Native Americans. Have you heard anything about this over there? So he gave a letter to Father Padre Esteban Perea, who brought it up in 69, this letter up to Isleta. And he came at that time with 12 extra friars and 36 ox carts of supplies. And they, every summer at this time, the Franciscans would have a meeting there in Santo Domingo Pueblo. Well, while they were up there, the Humanos came again asking to be baptized. Paul Harden says this was July 2nd, 1629. And so they hurried from Santo Domingo down to meet and talk with them. And they said, again, it was, they came asking to be baptized. They had this instruction received from the lady in blue. And there was a picture of another nun dressed as the conceptionist on the wall. And they said, was that her? And they said, oh, she had the same outfit but she was much younger and more beautiful. So they made the connection, realized, oh, this is the nun that the Archbishop and the priests in Spain were telling us about. And here the Native Americans, the Humanos, have the same story. So they sent two fathers, I think it's Fray Salas and Fray Lopez, went out. And it's interesting that the Indians were, so they were, they think bivouacked somewhere out there by the Salinas Pueblo, maybe a little, more west. They were out there, and there was a drought, and there was not enough water, and they were going to go back. And then the story is that Sor Maria came to them. So this is already in 1629, and came to them and said, no, they're on their way. The devil's just dried up the water and he's convincing you to leave, but the fathers are on their way and you should prepare to meet them. And she told them how to meet them in a procession with crosses and flowers. So when the priests came, sure enough, the Humanos met them with these with crosses and flowers and asked to be baptized. And they spent a lot of time baptizing them. And then they started bringing them their sick, because I think also Sor Agreda told them that they can heal their sick. And I think, and according to one of Fray Benavides' account, that they were all night long baptizing the natives. One thing though, when you can get his account again, it'll be in my bibliography. It's in our library. I think it's even online. It's just a few pages. It's not very long. But he wrote his 1634 account to the Pope, trying to convince that he gets more, to get more supplies and missionaries. So some scholars say he's exaggerating, the numbers of converts if you read it. But I mean, there's a kernel of truth. I don't think, there's a kernel of truth to some of this, because in fact, the Humanos in San Angelo, Texas, every year they honor Our Lady in Blue. They have a festival, and they recently built the sculpture of her and two Native Americans, which I think is interesting in this time when you hear about in California where they're knocking down the sculptures of Fray Junipero Serra. They're knocking them down, and meanwhile in Texas, they're building sculptures to the missionaries. I mean, and to her, which I think is beautiful. So, okay, see my next slide. Oh, so now I'll tell you my story, except, wait, let me go back because I want to read I'll tell a little bit about it. So I wanted to honor this event that she did appear in Socorro, because so Fray Alonso, he was the custodian, the custos, the Franciscan custos of all this area of Santa Fe from 1623 to 29, which is when Perea, he was the one who came up with the extra missionaries. So he came to take over, and his superiors in Spain called him back because they wanted him to meet with Sor Maria. So at the meeting, he met with her, and she described what the captain of the Native Americans looked like. She described the two priests who came out to meet the Humanos. She could describe, the flora and fauna of the area. And he told her, let's see, let me go back. He told her, my dear fathers, oh, no, that's the wrong one. Oh, yeah, this is Fray Alonso Benavides writing to the missionaries back in New Mexico. So this was his letter that accompanied Sor Maria's letter to the missionaries. And so in his letter, he wrote, my dear fathers, I do not know how to express to your paternities the impulses and great force of my spirit when this blessed mother told me that she had been present with me at the baptism of the Piros, and that she recognized me as the one she had seen there. So she was it was Nuestra Senora del Socorro at that time. It wasn't San Miguel, but she was there at this baptism because the Piros were, we know, in our area. And Paul Hardin sets this date as August 3rd, 1626, when Benavides came down for the dedication, the official dedication of our church as Nuestra Senora del Socorro was on this date. And he said that was the tradition that the custos, like the bishop, the head, would come at a dedication, and that the other baptisms after that would be the local priests. But so he says this was the big event, and that's the day he would have been here. And so Paul Hardin concludes that we know at least we have a date specifically, and we do know, according to their correspondence, that she was in Socorro at least once, which I think is just super cool. It's really cool, which is why I did this painting to commemorate this and give me the excuse to give this talk, that I really wanted to, share this news with everybody. I don't know. I hope everyone finds it as exciting as I do. But here, so I have Maria Agreda with the cross and the quill and her book, because she wrote The Mystical City of God, and the cross that she carried to the natives. She also brought rosaries. She told the inquisitors that she brought rosaries. Oh, and just an aside, after 11 days, like all day of grueling, in-depth questions, half of which she was sick, the first half of it, the inquisitors asked her for things she had held, and just told the other nuns what a treasure they had. And they convinced her so much that they revered her as a living saint. So from being suspicious and accusatory, by the end of the meeting, they said, and she was so savvy. She was really smart. When they said, do you want to say anything else? She said, I would like to just testify my deep faith. And she knelt and she gave a whole long list of all the things of the Holy Catholic faith that she believed in, in front of them. Anyway, so, and that's how they would dress. And they wore blue. They wore the blue cloak in honor of the conception. We talked about this in Joe's Bible class. The Dominicans were against the idea of the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. The Franciscans, following Duns Scotus, the philosopher who was a Franciscan, were for it. So they were Franciscans and they wore this blue cloak. And even I was surprised to learn, maybe some of you know this, that the friars wore blue. They didn't wear the traditional brown that we associate with Franciscans, because I saw a few pictures researching, older colonial pictures, and then a picture of Junipero Serra in California. I said, they're wearing blue. What's up with that? And sure enough, they wore blue in New Mexico, probably in Spain too, but they wore blue in honor of Our Lady's conception. So again, this is my idealized kind of fantasy version. I know this is not reality, and it's. I mean, if you talk to real historians, they would say, oh, the natives hated the Spanish and all that. I don't know, but this is my idealized, I guess, hagiographic version. So, and he's assisted. I'm assuming he wouldn't have traveled alone, so I added a friar. Maybe that would be the local pastor at the time. And I made a family unit, because the family as a unit is the unit of our church and of society. I made the water of baptism, the dish. I made it a Native American bowl. And I looked at the scraps, little shards that they have from the El Camino exhibit that are in the public library. And so I extrapolated in some of the little scraps to make that bowl, because that was found locally. And then here's the corn, because again, when the missionaries came up, they were given mucha maize, and we know corn, obviously corn. And I think I have some beans in there too, the beans and corn and squash for the local products. And I saw a map of corn, and one of them said blue corn was from Socorro. It was a chart of corn. I saw in a museum somewhere. So I made some blue corn, and the sunflowers that we have this time of year, of course. I have Custos Fra Alonso de Benavides, OFM, the Franciscan, and La Visitación de Sor Maria de Jesus de Agreda, and Un Bautismo de los Piros, ATSIEM. That was, I think, their word for it, or it means people, like Dine means people in Navajo. ATSIEM was their word for people. La Misión de Nuestra Señora de Socorro de Palabo, which was Palabo at the time, in 3 Agosto, 1626. And of course, the angels. I have St. Michael up here, who's, represents our parish, and, all different nationalities of angels. I mean, all ethnicities, because especially Sor Maria, she loved all people of the world. And I put Our Lady of Guadalupe, because she's always been, I don't know, there's nothing in my research that she was there at the baptism, but she loved the native people. As we know, she appeared to Juan Diego. And just an interesting aside, in Mexico, the Spanish settlers did not really accept Our Lady of Guadalupe, because they kind of had some of them had their noses in the air. And there was another statue supposedly miraculously found in Mexico called Nuestra Señora de los Remedios, which is what the Conquistadora, in Santa Fe, that's Nuestra Señora de Remedios. They were devoted to her under that title whereas the natives were devoted to Our Lady Guadalupe. So that's why I put Our Lady Guadalupe in there, because, you know, she came to help convert the natives, and she has this, you know, under her mantle, that special protection of her. Okay, let's see the next one. Okay, so these are just, I'll go through this quickly, some of this, I mentioned some of it, but her influence was not only by evangelizing some of the natives, but she was so popular, and her book was so popular in this scholarly book, which is really too scholarly to read. Again, I hold it up here, the cross and the cross and the quill. It's really, really in depth. It's written by a associate professor of Hispanic Southwest Studies at UNM in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese. She goes in depth. She researches all the libraries in Mexico and California, you know, even New Mexico, to see how many copies they had of the City of God, you know, of her book. And she said in the seminaries, there were classes on Sor Maria's writing. So the missionaries were educated in her bilocations and in her book and in her philosophies, which would include treating the natives well. And then they spread out everywhere. So her influence went on for, you know, even a couple of centuries. For example, Fray Junipero Serra, who evangelized, right, in California, founded those missionaries. They said the only two books he brought with him were the Bible and the Mystical City of God. And they would have carried, this is from the convent, a copy, they would have carried the Mystical City of God in like a case like this. This is from the Agreda convent. And it has a picture of St. John the Evangelist, the Immaculate Conception, Maria de Agreda, and I think St. Francis. Anyway, and they would have carried it in a beautiful, they call it an arca. It's interesting, that's Ark of the Covenant, but it's an Ark of the City of God. And that he was so influenced also by her visions that he wore like these hemp sandals, just like Jesus did in the book. And his companion, there's a book, Padre Paulo describes this in there. So I said, I already talked about the missionaries. Padre Antonio Margil, maybe you've heard of him. He's known as the Apostle of Texas. He would read a chapter from her book every night. And he evangelized Texas, Guatemala, Mexico, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. So that's another thing. The seminarians from Mexico, they went all through South America too. So her influence was in South America too, by these, you know, by these Franciscan missionaries. And even the Jesuits who also evangelized in the North and South America, they had her book, Ana Nogar, found even in their ceremony, in their seminaries, they had her book too, the Jesuits. When some missionaries came later, like I think 1690, when they came, I'm sorry, I forgot the town. The natives there asked the missionaries for blue material to bury their dead, because the women did this. They so loved the lady who came to them from heaven that they want to be buried in blue cloth. So that was, again, after a pause of no missionaries of several, 60 decades. 6 decades. San Angelo, and I'd like to go there and visit, but they still they celebrate her every year. You can look up online the beautiful sculpture. They even wrote a ballet musical based on her life that they performed there. So she's very much alive and honored there in San Angelo, Texas. In our library, even, we have a children's book that Ana Nogar wrote, and I just discovered this today. You see, you research, and there's just more. You never can get to the bottom of research. But in this March of 2021, the deacon, I didn't write his name, Torres is his last name. Torres, he's the deacon at Holy Trinity in Arroyo Seco. He just published a novelized version of Maria Agreda's encounters with Native Americans. It's called The Children of the Blue Nun. He finished it in spite of he had 2 strokes in the last couple of years, and he typed it out, with one hand to finish it. But I'd like to read that. But that was just published in March 2021. So there's still, she's not dead yet. There's still and ongoing the efforts to to proceed with her canonization. Another local connection we have here is the SALT community, Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity, started by Father Flanagan, and it was a ceremony. It was a seminary and then a novitiate for sisters up in it's not Abetus, well, between Bosque up there between, like Bernardo and Berlin. They have a place there. And he was influenced, the founder was at Notre Dame. He was like a captain for the football team. He was a really prized football player, the Notre Dame team, Father Flanagan. And at the time, he had contact with a group inspired by Solanus Casey. Maybe you've heard of him. I think he was just made a saint from Michigan. And Solanus Casey used to read the City of God, every night for an hour on his knees too. He was so inspired by it. And so Father Flanagan, in his order, he also has all the members read from the City of God, and he has religious exercises and prayers taken from the City of God. So that's also still a living modern influence of her. Okay, so here's my bibliography. Maybe I can answer some questions if anybody wants to write down the references in case you want to look up anything while I answer questions. So here's the 4-volume set of the City of God. It's really cool too, all the connections. My version, published by the Blue Army, translated by Fiscar Marion in 1902. The imprimatur is by New Mexico Archbishop Byrne. So it's like, wow, there's always so many connections. You can get the memorial of Fray Alonso. They have it in the library, and it's also online. It's really short. You can also get it online. Clark Callahan has translated some works of Maria de Agreda, and also it's more of a literary analysis of her writing. And I want to read that more carefully since I was a literature major, but he talks about how just, advanced and just, beautiful her writing is. It's how she is as a writer. It's a little scholarly. This one, as I said, I highly recommend, The Mystical Lady in Blue, because it's very readable, and it's really, I think it's an exciting book. Paul Hardin's article is also, it's online if you want to read it. I'm sorry, I don't have the website. And then this one about the quill and the crossroads, if you really want to get into the nitty gritty of her influence, but it's very scholarly. It goes into too much detail. But the nice thing is she has Spanish and English. Whenever she quotes anybody, like the friars or Maria de Agreda, she puts it both in Spanish and English, so you get the original Spanish. So,
Adrianna, you have one question up there.
Okay.
Actually, it's a comment from Nadine. If you'll open your question and answer window.
Okay.
And then while you're doing that, I just want to point out.
Yes, Nadine. Yeah. Thank you, Larry Torres. Mm-hmm.
There's the City of God, which is by St. Augustine. And then this is the Mystical City of God. So if you're going to be getting the book, make sure you make the distinction between the City of God by St. Augustine and the Mystical City of God.
Mary being the mystical city of God, like the New Jerusalem coming out of heaven, and then Jesus was in her, and we're all kind of in her. So I don't know. I wonder if people put questions in the chat. Should I look at the chat? Because I only have that. So Nadine, I don't know if you heard me. Yes, it's Deacon Larry Torres. Yes. Yeah, I think that's cool too. Again, local author. Should I read the chat? Okay. Perhaps it would be good to allow a bit more time given the delay. Well, thank you, Bob. I finished. So, okay. Anything else? Well, I don't know if there are any more. Are there any other questions? Did I talk too fast? Oh, good. Thank you. Thanks. Yes, I did say it will be. Yeah, we are recording it. I said that at the beginning. So if anyone couldn't watch it for some reason, I don't know if you can edit out part of the recording, Joe, of all the the mess at the beginning. But
yeah, we'll touch it up. We'll touch it up. We'll add some actors and actresses to this to get some credit, some screen time.
Oh, about the painting, yeah, Darlene, you mentioned I have copies for sale. If you'd like to buy, I have an 8x10 for $10, and then a 15x17 for $15. And the money I raise with that, I want to just get it professionally photographed, and I want to make and then make a nice canvas print to donate to the church or the church museum. So if anyone wants to buy a print, you can get in touch with me and have your own copy. And if you'd like to see it either in the church and museum, we can petition the parish council and petition Father, because I think it's part of the history and it's important. Okay. think that was it. Oh, I think my daughter said it was great. Thank you.
Nadine made another comment, and we'll provide the bibliography somehow to make sure that everybody gets it.
Okay, yeah, I'll copy it onto a document, and I can send that. Yeah, like I said, unless you want to just take the notes now. So, but gosh, that's it. There's no questions. Well, yeah. Anyway, there was so much. It was really exciting to study it. But it's not so crazy, right? We have Padre Pio in our own day who bilocated. Okay, so I guess if there are no questions, I just thank you so much. Oh, okay, I have a friend who's saying, thank you so much for taking your time. I hope it instilled a little bit of pride, more pride in your hometown and your church. I mean, it did for me, and that's why I really I'd love for young people to know these stories. I think it can inspire our young people.
There's still a question coming in from Bade.
Okay.
She says, I have a question, but she's still typing.
Okay.
So did she make any
Yeah.
comment as to why she was directed by the Virgin Mary to appear in New Mexico, right?
No. This was her own volition. This was her own heart called her there.
Well, how did she choose New Mexico?
It's what I told you before. Is our Lord told her in prayer that the New Mexicans he has great compassion. They're very close to his heart, and they're most likely to convert. That's what's again, I think special for, especially I think that the natives, because they were the ones here, not us necessarily, but yeah, I think that's really cool. It was just God told her that.
Okay, check your chat. Bade put a question out there.
Yeah, and we have probably some of you know we have someone of Piro descent in Socorro, Piro Spanish descent, Joe Loya. Okay, her qualities. Do you mean to go to New Mexico, or what gave her qualities to bilocate? I guess I could answer both. One was like I said to Joe, it was our Lord told her in prayer. That these people are very, I think they said, apt and competent and like noble people in Texas, New Mexico and Texas, and that they're most likely to convert. Yeah, Rose, New Mexico, true. Yeah.
Gilbert put a question out on the Q&A.
Okay. I have a whole. I didn't even get to go into all those details because there's so much. But the National Park Service, if you visit Gran Quivira, they have a whole historical write-up. I can even lend it to you. That talks about the missionaries there, and they did come back after the missionaries went back. First time, then they came back, I think in 1631, and I think they did build the mission church. That's when they started building those missions out there in the Salinas. But yeah, and at Gran Quivira, I'm sorry, I always mix up Cuare and Gran Quivira out there. They're two different ones.
Cuare is by Punta de Agua, north of Mount Air. Cuare is by Punta de Agua, north of Mount Air. Yeah,
I think that's the one. That's the one where there was a delegation from Spain that came in 2012, which is the year that that's why Paul Hardin wrote that article. They came from Spain. They had a roundtable discussion with members of the Archdiocese, and then they did a tour. They did a tour to Isleta. They had a mass there, and then they did a mass out there. I was at that mass with the Salt Sisters, and it's really cool. Father Flanagan was at that mass too. It was so powerful because, it's all open. You have the blue sky and the red brick and, a mass with open in the ruins there after, 400 years or however long it was. It was really, really powerful. Yeah. So there was a group. I'm not sure how how they're doing now with the canonization process, but they came out here. I think they went to Texas too, to some of these sites, but the Spanish contingent wanted to visit, the sites here associated with her in the Southwest.
Darlene added a chat, and then for Ines, we'll have a link for the recorded version.
Oh, cool. Both names, Catalina and Concepcion. That's awesome. Well, I hope your grandmother didn't make your grandfather turn their home into a convent, though. Okay. Okay. Oh, I just got rid of my slide. All right. Well, on that black note, and thank you for your patience at the beginning with my technology. I guess if I could have bilocated, it would have worked better than. But I will tell you, I could really relate to, like I said at the beginning, when I lost all my slides, and I said, "Oh gosh," I just kept thinking of her having to rewrite her book, and while I was redoing my slides. But, okay, well, thank you. I guess God bless everybody.